Continuing Cato the Younger, from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. Caesar was at this time engaged with many warlike nations, and was subduing them at great hazards. Among the rest, it was believed he had set upon the Germans in a time of truce, and had thus slain 300,000 of them, upon which some of his friends moved the Senate for a public thanksgiving, but Cato declared they ought to deliver Caesar into the hands of those who had been thus unjustly treated, and so expiate the offense, and not bring a curse upon the city. Yet we have reason, said he, to thank the gods for that they spared the commonwealth, and did not take vengeance upon the army for the madness and folly of the general. Now, what do they mean by gods? We in English, we translate all sorts of things as gods. Yes, people worship all sorts of things, but it helps to know what, at times, they meant by it. And not everything called something is something. Now, there's a mistranslation of the Bible that says he shall be called. Does it say he is? No. It says he shall be called. But then again, anything with that aleph, lamed ending, or yud, hey ending, it's not a god. Or part of God, or whatever, Hereupon, Caesar wrote a letter to the Senate, which was read openly, and was full of reproachful language and accusations against Cato, who, standing up, seemed not at all concerned, and without any heat or passion, but in a calm and, as it were, premeditated discourse, made all Caesar's charges against him show like mere common scolding and abuse, and in fact a sort of pleasantry and play on Caesar's part, and proceeding then to go into all Caesar's political courses, and to explain and reveal, as though he had been not his constant opponent, but his fellow conspirator, his whole conduct and purpose from its commencement. He concluded by telling the Senate it was not the sons of the Bretons or the Gauls they need fear, but Caesar himself, if they were wise. And this discourse so moved and awakened the Senate that Caesar's friends repented. They had a letter read, which had given Cato an opportunity of saying so many reasonable things, and such severe truths against him. However, nothing was then decided upon. It was merely said that it would be well to send him a successor. Upon that, Caesar's friends required that Pompey also should lay down his arms and resign his provinces, or else that Caesar might not be obliged to either. Then Cato cried out that he had foretold what he had foretold was come to pass. Now it was manifest he was using his forces to compel their judgment, and was turning against the state those armies he had got from it by imposture and trickery. But out of the Senate house Cato could do but little, as the people were ever ready to magnify Caesar, and the Senate, although convinced by Cato, were afraid of the people. But when the news was brought that Caesar had seized Riminum and was marching with his army towards Rome, then all men, even Pompey, and the common people too, cast their eyes on Cato, who had alone foreseen and first clearly declared Caesar's intentions. He therefore told them, if you had believed me or regarded my advice, you would not now have been reduced to stand in fear of one man, or to put all your hopes in one alone. Pompey acknowledged that Cato indeed had spoken most like a prophet, while he himself had acted too much like a friend, and Cato advised the Senate to put all into the hands of Pompey, for those who can raise up great evils, said he, can best allay them. Pompey, finding he had not sufficient forces, and that those he could raise were not very resolute, forsook the city. Cato, resolving to follow Pompey in exile, sent his younger son to Manatius, who was then in the country of Bruttium, and took his eldest son with him. But wanting somebody to keep his house and take care of his daughters, he took Marcia again, who was now a rich widow. Hortensius being dead, and having left her all his estate, Caesar afterwards made use of this action also, to reproach him with covetousness and a mercenary design in the marriage. For, said he, if he had need of a wife, why did he part with her? And if he had not, why did he take her again? Well, difference between need and want, right? Unless he gave her only as a bait to Hortensius, and lent her when she was young, to have her again when she was rich. But in answer to this, we might fairly apply the saying of Euripides, to speak of mysteries, the chief of these surely were cowardice in Hercules. I forget how you spell Hercules, so I'm not sure how you actually pronounce it, but for it is much the same thing to reproach Hercules for cowardice and to accuse Cato of covetousness, though otherwise, whether he did altogether right in the marriage might be disputed. As soon, however, as he had again taken Marcia, he committed his house and his daughters to her, and himself followed Pompey, and it is said that from that day he never cut his hair, nor shaved his beard, nor wore a garland, but was always full of sadness, grief, and dejectedness for the calamities of his country, and continually showed the same feeling to the last, whatever party had a misfortune or success. The government of Sicily being allotted to him, he passed over to Syracuse, where, understanding that Asinius Pollio was arrived at Messina with forces from the enemy, Cato sent to him to know the reason of his coming thither. Pollio, on the other side, called upon him to show reason for the present convulsions, and being at the same time informed how Pompey had quite abandoned Italy, and lay encamped at Dyrrhachium, he spoke of the strangeness and incomprehensibility of the divine government of things. Pompey, when he did nothing wisely nor honestly, was always successful, and now he would preserve his country and defend her liberty. He is altogether unfortunate. As for Asinius, he said he could drive him out of Sicily, but as there were larger forces coming to his assistance, he would not engage the island in a war. He therefore advised the Saracens to join the conquering party, and to provide for their own safety, and so set sail from thence. When he came to Pompey, he uniformly gave advice to protract the war, as he always hoped to compose matters, and was by no means desirous that they should come to action, for the Commonwealth would suffer extremely, and be the certain cause of its own ruin. Whoever were conqueror by the sword in a like manner, he persuaded Pompey and the council to ordain that no city should be sacked that was subject to the people of Rome, and that no Roman should be killed but in the heat of battle. And hereby he got himself great honor, and brought over many to Pompey's party, whom his moderation and humanity attracted. Well, you don't get rid of the death penalty, but the the fact people have to be told, don't kill the fellow citizens. You know, we're almost getting to that point in America, right? Even on the news, they're saying, oh, no, it's not some genocide if you knock it off. Yeah, you know, what you say to those people. Afterwards, being sent into Asia to assist those who were raising men and preparing ships in those parts, he took with him his sister Servilia and a little boy whom she had by Lucullus. Since her widowhood she had lived with her brother and much recovered her reputation, having put herself under his care, followed him in his voyages, and complied with his severe way of living. Yet Caesar did not fail to asperse him upon her account also. Pompey's officers in Asia, it seems, had no great need of Cato, but he brought over the people of Rhodes by his persuasions, and leaving his sister Servilia and her child there, he returned to Pompey, who had now collected very great forces both by sea and land, and here Pompey, more than in any other act, betrayed his intentions, for at first he designed to give Cato the command of the navy, which consisted of no less than 500 ships of war, besides a vast number of light galleys, scouts, and open boats. But presently, bethinking himself, or put in mind by his friends, that Cato's principal and only aim being to free the country from all usurpation, if he were master of such great forces, as soon as ever Caesar should be conquered, he would certainly call upon Pompey also to lay down his arms and be subject to the laws. He changed his mind, and, though he had already mentioned it to Cato, nevertheless made Bibulus admiral. Notwithstanding this, he had no reason to suppose that Cato's zeal in the cause was in any way diminished, for before one of the battles at Dyrrhachium, when Pompey himself, we are told, made an address to the soldiers and begged the officers to do the like, the men listened to them, but coldly and with silence, until Cato, last of all, came forward, and, in the language of philosophy, spoke to them, as the occasion required, concerning liberty, manly virtue, death, and a good name, upon all which he delivered himself with strong natural passion, and concluded with calling in the aid of what he considered to be gods and goddesses, to whom he directed his speech, as if they were present, and to behold them fight for their country. Well, some entities do join in war, not entirely at command, but command of the humans, anyways. And at this, the army gave such a shout and showed such excitement that their officers led them, on full hope and confidence, to the danger. Caesar's party were routed and put to flight, but his presiding fortune used the advantage of Pompey's cautiousness and diffidence to render the victory incomplete. But of this we have spoken in the life of Pompey, while, however, all the rest rejoiced and magnified their success. Cato alone bewailed his country, and cursed that fatal ambition which made so many brave Romans murder one another. After this, Pompey, following Caesar into Thessaly, left at Dyrrhachium a quantity of munitions, money, and stores, and many of his domestics and relations, the charge of all which he gave to Cato, with the command only of 15 cohorts, for though he trusted him much, yet he was afraid of him too, knowing full well that if he had bad success, Cato would be the last to forsake him, if it's any success. But if he conquered, would never let him use his victory at his pleasure. Well, it's a weird way to phrase it. It's like, oh, if you lose, it's bad success. It's like, Okay, well, this is written in the 1800s, so there were likewise many persons of high rank that stayed with Cato at Dyrrhachium when they heard of the overthrow at Pharsalia. Cato resolved with himself that if Pompey were slain, he would conduct those that were with him into Italy, and then retire as far from the tyranny of Caesar as he could, and live in exile. But if Pompey were safe, he would keep the army together for him. With this resolution, he passed over to Corcyra, where the navy lay, where he would have resigned his command to Cicero, because he had been consul, and himself only praetor. But Cicero refused it, and was going for Italy, at which Pompey's son, being incensed, would rashly and in heat have punished all those who were going away, and in the first place have laid hands on Cicero. But Cato spoke with him in private, and diverted him from that design, and thus he clearly saved the life of Cicero, and rescued several others also from ill treatment. Conjecturing that Pompey the Great was fled toward Egypt or Africa, Cato resolved to hasten after him, and having taken all his men aboard, he set sail. But first to those who were not zealous to continue the contest, he gave free liberty to depart. When they came to the coast of Africa, they met with Sextus, Pompey's youngest son, who told them of the death of his father in Egypt, at which they were all exceedingly grieved, and declared that after Pompey they would follow no other leader but Cato. Out of compassion, therefore, to so many worthy persons who had given such testimonies of their fidelity, and whom he could not for shame leave in a desert country amidst so many difficulties, he took upon him the command and marched toward the city of Carena, which presently received him, though not long before that they had shut their gates against Labienus. Here he was informed that Scipio, Pompey's father-in-law, was received by King Juba, and that Aetius Varus, whom Pompey had made governor of Africa, had joined them with his forces. Cato, therefore, resolved to march toward them by land, it being now winter, and got together a number of donkeys to carry water, and furnished himself likewise with plenty of all other provision, and a number of carriages. He took also with him some of those they call bacilli, who cure the biting of serpents by sucking out the poison with their mouths. They have likewise certain charms, by which they stupefy and lay asleep the serpents. Thus they march 7 days together, Cato all the time going on foot at the head of his men, and never making use of any horse or chariot. Ever since the battle of Pharsalia, he used to sit at table, and added this to his other ways of mourning, that he never laid down but to sleep. Having passed the winter in Africa, Cato drew out his army, which amounted to little less than 10,000. The affairs of Scipio and Varus went very ill by reason of their dissensions and quarrels among themselves, and their submissions and flatteries to King Juba, who was insupportable for his vanity, and the pride he took in his strength and riches. The first time he came to a conference with Cato, he had ordered his own seat to be placed in the middle, between Scipio and Cato, which Cato, observing, took up his chair and set himself on the other side of Scipio, to whom he thus gave the honor of sitting in the middle, though he were his enemy, and had formerly published some scandalous writing against him. There are people who speak as if this were quite an insignificant matter, and who nevertheless find fault with Cato, because in Sicula, walking one day with Philostratus, he gave him the middle place to show his respect for philosophy. However, he now succeeded both in humbling the pride of Juba, who was treating Scipio and Varus much like a pair of satraps under his orders, and also in reconciling them to each other. All the troops desired him to be their leader. Scipio likewise and Varus gave way to it, and offered him the command, but he said he would not break those laws which he sought to defend, and he, being but propraetor, ought not to command in the presence of a proconsul, for Scipio had been created proconsul. Besides that, people took it as a good omen to see a Scipio command in Africa, and the very name inspired the soldiers with hopes of success. Scipio, having taken upon him the command, presently resolved, at the instigation of Juba, to put all the inhabitants of Utica to the sword, and to raise the city, for having, as they professed, taken part with Caesar. Cato would by no means suffer this, but invoking the entities, exclaiming and protesting against it in the council of war, he, with much difficulty, delivered the poor people from this cruelty, and afterwards, upon the entreaty of the inhabitants, and at the instance of Scipio, Cato took upon himself the government of Utica, lest, one way or the other, it should fall into Caesar's hands, for it was a strong place and very advantageous for either party, and it was yet better provided and more strongly fortified by Cato, who brought in great store of corn, repaired the walls, erected towers, and made deep trenches and palisades around the town. The young men of Attica he lodged among these works, having first taken their arms from them. The rest of the inhabitants he kept within the town, and took the greatest care that no injury should be done, nor affront offered them by the Romans. From hence he sent a great quantity of arms, money, and provision to the camp, and made this city their chief magazine. He advised Scipio, as he had before done Pompey, by no means to hazard a battle against a man experienced in war and formidable in the field, but to use delay, for time would gradually abate the violence of the crisis, which is the strength of usurpation. But Scipio, out of pride, rejected this counsel, and wrote a letter to Cato in which he reproached him with cowardice, and that he could not be content to lie secure himself within walls and trenches, but he must hinder others from boldly using their own good sense to seize the right opportunity. Why would you hinder others from seizing the right anything? But, well, the opportunity to go against them, perhaps. It's just what I'm thinking of with that phrase. But, it's not saying that it was the right thing for them to do, or their opportunity to do the right thing. In answer to this, Cato wrote the word again, that he would take the horse and foot which he had brought into Africa, and go over into Italy, and make a diversion there, and draw Caesar off from them. But Scipio decided this proposition also. Then Cato openly let it be seen that he was sorry he had yielded the command to Scipio, who he saw would not carry on the war with any wisdom, and if contrary to all appearance he should succeed, he would use his success as unjustly at home, for Cato had then made up his mind, and so he told his friends, that he could have but slender hopes in those generals that had so much boldness and so little conduct. Yet, if anything should happen beyond expectation, and Caesar should be overthrown, for his part he would not stay at Rome, but would retire from the cruelty and inhumanity of Scipio, who had already uttered fierce and proud threats against many. But what Cato had looked for fell out sooner than he expected. Late in the evening came one from the army, whence he had been 3 days coming, who brought word there had been a great battle near Thapsus, that all was utterly lost. Caesar had taken the camps. Scipio and Jubba were fled, with a few only, and all the rest of the army were lost. This news, arriving in time of war, and in the night, so alarmed the people that they were almost out of their wits, and could scarce keep themselves within the walls of the city. But Cato came forward, and meeting the people in this hurry and clamor, did all he could to comfort and encourage them, that somewhat appeased the fear and amazement they were in, but telling them that very likely things were not so bad in truth, but much exaggerated in the report, and so he pacified the tumult for the present. The next morning he sent for 300, whom he used as his council. These were Romans who were in Africa upon business in commerce and money lending. There were also several senators and their sons. They were summoned to meet in the temple of Jupiter. While they were coming together, Cato walked about very quietly and unconcerned, as if nothing new had happened. He had a book in his hand which he was reading, and this book was an account of what provision he had for war: armor, corn, any sort of grain. Sorry if I can't find too much comfort sitting still, but ammunition and soldiers, and they were assembled. He began his discourse first as regarded the 300 themselves, and very much commended the courage and fidelity they had shown, and their having very well served their country with their persons, money, and counsel. Then he entreated them by no means to separate, as if each single man could hope for any safety in forsaking his companions. On the contrary, while they kept together, Caesar would have less reason to despise them if they fought against him, and be more forward to pardon them if they submitted to him. Therefore he advised them to consult among themselves, nor should he find fault whichever course they adopted. If they thought fit to submit to fortune, he would impute their change to necessity. But if they resolved to stand firm and undertake the danger for the sake of liberty, he should not only commend but admire their courage, and would himself be their leader and companion too, till they had to put to the proof the utmost fortune of their country, which was not Utica or Adrumetum, but Rome, and she had often, by her own greatness, raised herself after worse disasters. Besides, as there were many things that would conduce to their safety, so chiefly this, that they were to fight against one another whose affairs urgently claimed his presence in various quarters. Spain was already revolted to the younger Pompey. Rome was unaccustomed to the bridle, and impatient of it, and would therefore be ready to rise in insurrection upon any turn of affairs. As for themselves, they ought not to shrink from the danger, and in this might take example from their enemy, who so freely exposes his life to effect the most unrighteous designs, yet never can hope for so happy a conclusion as they may promise themselves, for notwithstanding the uncertainty of war, they will be sure of a most happy life if they succeed, or a most glorious death if they miscarry. However, he said, they ought to deliberate among themselves, and he joined with them in praying the entities that in recompense of their former courage and goodwill, they would prosper their present determinations. When Cato had thus spoken, many were moved and encouraged by his arguments, but the greatest part were so animated by the sense of his intrepidity, generosity, and goodness, that they forgot the present danger, and as if he were the only invincible leader, and above all fortune, they entreated him to employ their persons, arms, and estates, as he thought fit, for they esteemed it far better to meet death in following his counsel than to find their safety in betraying one of so great virtue. One of the assembly proposed the making a decree to set the slaves at liberty. Most of the rest approved the motion. Well, betraying people shouldn't be quite how you esteem them. You should, even if it's not a good person, you still don't betray them, Cato said that it ought not to be done, for it was neither just nor lawful, but if any of their masters would willingly set them free, those that were fit for service should be received. Now, of course, I'm not excluding the military and criminal aspect about that. There are certainly incidences where that can be the case. Many promised so to do, whose names he ordered to be enrolled, and then withdrew. Presently after this he received letters from Juba and Scipio. Juba, with some few of his men, was retired to a mountain, where he wanted to hear what Cato would resolve upon, and intended to stay there for him, if he thought fit to leave Utica, or to come to his aid with his troops. And if he were besieged, Scipio was on shipboard, near a certain promontory, not far from Utica, expecting an answer upon the same account, but Cato thought fit to retain the messengers till the 300 should come to some resolution. As for the senators that were there, they showed great forwardness, and at once set free their slaves and furnished them with arms. But the 300, being men occupied in merchandise and money lending, much of their substance also consisting in slaves, the enthusiasm that Cato's speech had raised in them did not long continue, as there are substances that can easily emit heat and as suddenly lose it when the fire is removed. So these men were heated and inflamed while Cato was present, but when they began to reason among themselves, the fear they had of Caesar soon overcame the reverence for Cato, and for virtue, for who we are, said they, and who it is we refuse to obey. Is it not that Caesar, who is now invested with all the power of Rome, and which of us is a Scipio, a Pompey, or a Cato? But now that all men make their honor give way to their fear, shall we alone engage for the liberty of Rome, and in Utica declare war against him for whom Cato and Pompey the Great fled out of Italy? Shall we set free our slaves against Caesar, who have ourselves no more liberty than he is pleased to allow? No, let us, poor creatures, no, ourselves, submit to the victor, and send deputies to implore his money. Thus said the most moderate of them, but the greatest part were for seizing the senators, that by securing them they might appease Caesar's anger. Cato, though he perceived the change, took no notice of it, but wrote to Juba and Scipio to keep away from Utica, because he mistrusted the 300. Now, certainly, of the first people that you hold accountable are those government figures when things go wrong. But that's not what they're stirring up. They're stirring up closer and closer to an actual civil war. But it's going to be the poor people on the street fighting, not the the upper 1% of the 1%, right? It's not going to be them. So don't fall for it.